The antiseptic burned as it seeped into the open gash above my eyebrow. I could taste copper and something bitter in my mouth. The fluorescent light above me hummed too loudly, the kind of sound that drills into your skull when the rest of the world goes quiet. I tried to lift my head, but the movement sent a spike of pain through my ribs. A nurse's voice came from somewhere near my left side, steady but urgent. "She's losing blood pressure. Get another line in." I blinked hard and the world tilted. Metal white antiseptic. The smell of iodine clung to everything. My right arm was twisted against my chest in a sling of torn fabric. The bruise across my jaw pulsed in rhythm with my heartbeat. I wasn't supposed to be here. Not again. My mind reached for something familiar. My phone. It was on the tray table beside the bed screen, cracked, speckled with dried blood. I used my left hand to drag it closer, my fingers trembling. I dialed the number that had once meant safety. "Mom," I whispered when she answered. My throat felt raw, the word barely more than air. "He hit me. Tom hit me again." There was a pause, then a long sigh, the kind that came before excuses. "Claire, honey, you know how he gets when you provoke him. He's been under a lot of stress." I froze the phone pressed against my cheek. "Mom," I said again, voice breaking. "I'm in the emergency room." Her tone didn't change. "You can't keep escalating things. Please don't make this worse." Something cracked inside me that had nothing to do with broken ribs. The line went dead. I let the phone slip from my hand, watched it fall to the floor with a dull final click. For a second, all I could hear was the steady beeping of the monitor beside me and the distant roll of a gurney down the hall. The nurse leaned over adjusting the IV. Her name tag read Maya. She looked familiar, maybe from the same hospital where I worked the night shift. Her eyes widened when she recognized me. Claire. "Oh my God, what happened?" I tried to speak, but the words got tangled in my throat. My breath hitched ribs, protesting every inhale. Maya squeezed my uninjured hand. "It's okay. You're safe now." Safe. The word landed heavy, meaningless. My mother's voice still echoed in my ears. "Please don't make this worse." The absurdity of it burned hotter than the antiseptic. I wasn't making anything worse. I was the one bleeding. I closed my eyes and saw it again. Tom's face, red with rage, veins rising on his neck, the sound of glass shattering. The way he called me ungrateful, useless, just like my father. Then the explosion of pain when his hand caught the side of my face. My knees had buckled, the world spinning before everything went black. And when I woke, it wasn't him I saw first. It was my mother kneeling beside him, arms around his shaking shoulders, whispering that everything would be okay. "Not me, him." The nurse's voice pulled me back. "Claire, can you tell me who did this?" I opened my eyes, stared at the ceiling. "My stepdad." She hesitated. "Do you want me to call the police?" I swallowed hard. The idea of police, of reports of confrontation, it all sounded too big for the moment. But something deeper than fear stirred in my chest. "Not yet," I whispered. "But I want pictures. Of everything." Maya nodded, professional now, and began snapping photos with the hospital's documentation camera. Each flash felt like a small defiance, a record that this pain existed. I turned my head toward the window. Outside, dawn was breaking pale and distant. I wondered if my mother was still at home, holding the man who had done this, convincing herself it was my fault again. For years I had stayed quiet to keep the peace, told myself love meant understanding. But lying on that hospital bed, I understood something else entirely. Silence wasn't peace. It was surrender. I watched the IV drip steady into my vein, each drop a slow pulse of something new, anger, resolve, life. And as the beeping steadied, I made myself a promise. This time, I wouldn't hide the bruises. This time, I wouldn't let her rewrite what happened. This time, the story would be mine. The memory came back in fragments, the sound of glass shattering, the taste of whiskey in the air, the slam of his boots against the kitchen tile. I had gotten home an hour early from the hospital, still in scrubs, exhausted, but grateful for a quiet evening. Instead, the living room was a mess. Tom's bottle on the table, the TV blaring a news segment about layoffs, and my mother's voice trying too hard to sound calm. "Tom, please," she said, standing near the stairs. He turned when I came in, eyes bloodshot, face red and damp with sweat. "Look who's finally home," he sneered. "Nurse of the Year." I ignored him and headed to the kitchen, setting down my bag. "Don't you walk away from me," he barked. I could feel it, the shift in the room, the tension that came before the storm. "Tom." "I'm not doing this tonight," I said, keeping my tone even. He followed his breath, hot, his words slurred. "You think you're better than me? You think your paycheck gives you the right to talk down to your mother's husband?" I opened the fridge, pretending to look for water. "I think you're drunk." That was all it took. The bottle flew first, smashing against the wall inches from my face. Before I could move, he grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my skin. "Don't walk away," he growled, and the next thing I knew, my head hit the corner of the counter. Pain burst like fireworks. The floor came up fast. I remember my knees buckling the tile cold under my cheek, the distant sound of my mother's voice screaming. But it wasn't for me. It was for him. "Tom, stop. Please calm down." Then softer, softer than I could stand. "It's okay, baby. She just gets mouthy sometimes." Through the blur, I saw it, her arms around him, her hand stroking his back while I lay bleeding 3 feet away. That image seared into me harder than the hit itself. Even bleeding on her kitchen floor, I wasn't the one who got comforted. I tried to move to crawl to reach my phone, but the room tilted, the sound of my mother's voice fading. "Don't call anyone, Claire." She said, her words thick with panic and shame. "You'll ruin his job." He didn't mean it. My vision dimmed, her voice the last thing I heard before everything went black. In that darkness, something shifted. It wasn't fear anymore, it was the first ember of rage. When I woke again, everything felt distant, the muted beeps of machines, the low murmur of voices beyond a curtain, the steady drip of an IV beside me. My body ached in places I didn't know could hurt. I turned my head slightly, saw bruises blooming like storm clouds across my collarbone. Every breath scraped against my ribs. A nurse walked in and smiled gently. "You're awake, Ms. Matthews. Try not to move too fast." Her voice was kind, but her eyes lingered a little too long on the bruises. "Do you have anyone coming to pick you up?" she asked softly. The answer was supposed to be yes. It should have been automatic. "Mom." But the word stuck in my throat. I hesitated too long, and that was all she needed to know. "Okay," she said quietly. "We'll keep you for observation tonight." I nodded, pretending not to care, pretending I was fine being alone. When she left, the silence returned heavy and alive. I looked toward the empty chair by my bed, the one that should have held my mother. I imagined her instead at home, making coffee for the man who had broken my face. Maybe she was pressing a cold cloth to his knuckles, telling him it wasn't his fault that I had pushed too hard again. That image hit harder than the blows. For the first time, I didn't feel confusion. I felt clarity. This was never about love. It was about control, about the story she needed to believe, that if she stayed loyal enough, obedient enough, forgiving enough, she could fix him. And I was the casualty of that illusion. The monitors hummed, filling the room with artificial life. I reached for my phone again. No calls, no messages, not even a text asking if I was alive. I stared at the blank screen until my own reflection blurred, unrecognizable beneath the swelling. I whispered into the quiet. "No one's coming." Saying it out loud felt like breaking a curse. For years I had survived by pretending I wasn't alone. But the truth was right here, fluorescent and sterile. And in that truth buried under the pain, something cold and sharp began to form a decision. If no one was coming to save me, I'd save myself. I used to think Tom's anger was just noise, a storm that passed if you kept quiet long enough. I learned early that silence was a form of survival. He came into our lives when I was 16, 2 years after my father's death. My mother met him through her church group, a man who promised security, who laughed too loudly, who fixed her leaky faucet and made her believe she was safe again. At first, he was charming. He bought me flowers when I graduated high school, called me kiddo, and pretended to care. But even then, the cracks were showing. He'd correct the way I spoke, mock the way I ate, joke that a nurse's kid better learn discipline. When I started my nursing program at 21, his temper had fully grown its teeth. Every report card, every exam grade, every night shift became ammunition. If you didn't work so much, he'd say maybe your mother wouldn't feel so alone. And when I tried to push back, Mom would whisper, "Don't upset him, Claire. He's under a lot of pressure." That line became a lullaby of denial. The first time he hit me, I was 23. I came home late after a double shift, exhausted and hungry. He was in the kitchen, half drunk, angry that dinner wasn't ready. When I told him I wasn't his servant, he slapped me so hard I saw white. Mom screamed, ran to him, begged him to stop, but she never looked at me. The next morning, she left a plate of eggs on my desk and said, "He's sorry, sweetheart. He just had too much to drink." I believed her because I wanted to. Every time after that, it became easier for them. He would break something, my things, my piece, sometimes my skin, and she would clean it up. When I finally graduated and got a job at St. James General, I thought earning my own money meant independence. But Tom found a way to twist that too. "You're living under this roof, aren't you? Be grateful." He demanded I contribute a third of my paycheck for house expenses. When I protested, he told Mom I was ungrateful. She agreed. It never mattered what I did, it was always framed as defiance. When I moved out at 27, I thought I had escaped. But freedom was an illusion. They called weekly guilt-tripping me with Bill's stories about Tom's bad health, the mortgage, how much they'd sacrificed. Mom said putting my name on the property deed was just to help with taxes. I signed without reading, still desperate for approval. That signature became a weapon years later, a detail I didn't understand until it was too late. Every visit home felt like walking into a performance. He'd play the doting stepfather. She'd beam, pretending our family worked. But I saw it in her eyes, the constant calculation, the fear of losing the only man she thought could love her. She called it compromise. I called it surrender. 2 years before the night he sent me to the ER, I had already seen the warning signs growing darker. He had begun drinking daily, controlling their finances, even reading my mail when I visited. One afternoon, I found him in my old room going through my bank statements. "What are you doing?" I demanded. He smirked. "Protecting my investment." I remember shaking, wanting to tell someone, but I didn't. Who would believe me? Mom had already rewritten history so many times. Even I was starting to question what was real. Every bruise became an accident. Every insult turned into he didn't mean it. And I, the supposedly strong daughter, learned to smile through it. Until the day I found the documents, the bank forms with my forged signature, the loan of $60,000 taken in both our names. That was when I understood it wasn't just abuse anymore. It was theft, manipulation, a full-scale trap. The worst part wasn't the violence. It was the realization that my mother knew. She had signed as a witness. She hadn't been protecting him out of ignorance. She'd been protecting her illusion of stability. And I, her only child, was the collateral. That discovery didn't just hurt. It clarified. That house, that family, that man, they had all been built on my silence. And that silence was ending soon. The next morning, I woke to the sound of the curtain pulling back. Maya, the nurse from last night, stood there holding a clipboard and a cup of coffee. Her dark eyes softened when she saw I was awake. "You didn't sleep much, huh?" she said quietly. I managed a small nod. "Did they call?" she asked. "Your family." I shook my head. No. She didn't react with pity, thank God for that. Instead, she sighed through her nose, that quiet kind of exhale nurses use when they're too used to bad stories. "I filed the report," she said, setting the coffee down beside my bed. "You have multiple contusions, fractured ribs, and a concussion. I also documented your statement from last night." I blinked at her, my brain foggy. "Statement. You said it was your stepfather, that you didn't want the police yet, but you wanted documentation." She tapped the clipboard. "I made sure the photos were archived in your chart, just in case you change your mind." I stared at her for a long moment, throat tight. "Thank you," I said, my voice barely there. "You shouldn't have to thank me for that," she replied. Then, after a beat, "You're not the first one you know. ER's full of women whose families would rather bury bruises than truth." Something in my chest cracked open. She didn't say it like a lecture. She said it like a fact of the world, ugly and familiar. She pulled a small card from her pocket and placed it next to my coffee cup. "Laura King. She's a lawyer. Works with victims of domestic violence. She's sharp and she doesn't scare easy." "I don't have money for that," I murmured. Maya smiled faintly. "She doesn't take cases for money. She takes them for justice." Then she leaned closer, voice low. "You've got more power than you think, Claire. Don't let them convince you otherwise." When she left, I stared at the business card for a long time. It was simple, white, and clean. Laura King, Attorney at Law. Family and Civil Rights. The font was unassuming, but the name hit me like an anchor. For the first time since the attack, I felt something that wasn't fear. It was direction. Later that afternoon, I made the call. The phone rang twice before a calm, precise voice answered. "Laura King's office." I swallowed. "My name's Claire Matthews. I need help. It's about my stepfather." "I'm listening," she said, no hesitation, no pity. I told her about the hospital, the forged loan, the years of manipulation. I told her about my mother's silence and how my name was tied to a house that had become a crime scene. She didn't interrupt once. When I finished, the line was quiet for a few seconds. Then she said, "All right, Claire, here's what we're going to do." It wasn't a question. It was a plan. And in that moment, for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like someone preparing for battle. Laura's voice was steady, the kind that made chaos sound solvable. "First, we secure proof," she said. "Everything you can access, medical records, photos, bank statements, copies of that mortgage. Don't delete anything, even messages from your mother." Her confidence gave me a strange sort of energy. I sat up in bed, pain flaring down my ribs, and started listing what I could recover. "There's the hospital chart," I said. Maya filed pictures and notes. "Good," Laura replied. "We'll request certified copies under your patient rights. Next, the financials. Do you have access to the loan files?" I hesitated. "Not directly, but I get monthly statements in email." "Forward them to me," she said, "and start taking screenshots of every transaction connected to your name." I opened my phone with shaking hands. The screen lit up to dozens of unread emails, ads, appointment reminders, not a single message from Mom. I opened the banking app. The numbers blurred at first, but there it was, a withdrawal of $60,000 dated 3 weeks ago. My signature on a scanned document attached. Except I had never signed it. I saved everything into a new folder titled Proof. Then I opened the voicemail tab. There were 2 messages, both from my mother. The first, "Claire, please don't tell anyone. He's ashamed. We can fix this." The second, "If you go to the police, you'll destroy what's left of this family." My thumb hovered over delete, but instead I pressed save. Every word was another brick in the wall they'd built around me, and I was dismantling it piece by piece. Laura interrupted my thoughts. "Do you have any witness?" "Maybe," I said. "The neighbor, Mrs. Dorsey. She's heard fights before. She called an ambulance last night." "Perfect," Laura said. "We'll include her statement." The precision in her tone steadied me. We were building something that could stand in court. After the call ended, I sat in the hospital bed surrounded by beeping machines and soft light, feeling a shift under my skin. For years, I had been terrified of making things worse. Now worse had already happened. All that was left was the truth. Later that night, I used the hospital computer to email myself copies of the incident report and radiology scans. Each attachment felt like reclaiming a piece of myself they had tried to erase. Around midnight, Maya stopped by with a new IV bag. "You working?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. I smiled faintly. "Collecting." She glanced at my screen, saw the open folder, and nodded approvingly. "Good. Paper cuts hurt less than bruises." Her words stayed with me. By morning, I had a digital trail, a map of everything they'd done. Financial fraud, emotional manipulation, assault. I renamed the main folder Truth. Then I forwarded it all to Laura. Within minutes, she replied, "Received. This is enough to start." "You're stronger than you think, Claire." I stared at the message until my eyes blurred. The phrase, "stronger than you think," used to sound like another way of saying you're on your own. But now it felt like a promise that the silence was finally breaking. I set the phone down, exhaled slowly, and for the first time since the attack, I felt steady. Not healed. Not okay. But steady, because now I had proof, and proof I was learning was louder than love. 3 days later, Laura walked into my hospital room like a woman who had already won half the battle. Her navy suit was pressed, her hair pulled tight, and her tablet glowed with documents I recognized. Loan forms, property deeds, the police incident report Maya had quietly filed. "Everything's lined up," she said. "You're officially listed as the complainant and co-signer victim of financial fraud and assault. I've already spoken to the local prosecutor." I blinked. "It's moving that fast." She smiled slightly. "Abusers like Tom depend on your hesitation. I don't give them time to breathe." As she spoke, a shadow crossed the doorway. My mother stood there pale and trembling, holding a paper bag. "Claire," she said softly, as if I were a fragile animal she didn't want to spook. Laura didn't flinch. "Mrs. Matthews, this isn't a good time." Mom's eyes flicked between us, landing on the legal documents spread across my blanket. "What is all this?" she demanded. "You can't do this to him. He's sick, Claire." I stared at her. "He's a criminal, Mom." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "You're exaggerating again. You always make things worse." Laura's voice sliced and calm but firm. "Ma'am, your husband assaulted a licensed healthcare worker and forged financial documents. You might want to choose your words carefully." Mom's voice cracked. "You don't understand. He's my husband. I can't just abandon him." "You already did," I whispered. "The night he hit me, you abandoned me." The silence stretched so long I could hear the monitor ticking beside me. My mother's eyes filled with tears, but they didn't fall. "I did what I had to," she said finally. "You're strong. You've always been strong." I shook my head. "That's not strength, Mom. That's survival." Laura stepped forward, sliding a document toward her. "Mrs. Matthews, as of this morning, we've filed for a restraining order and a freeze on joint assets. The forged loan and property deed are under investigation. Your husband will be questioned within 24 hours. My mother's face drained of color. "You can't?" "Oh, but we can," Laura said, voice cool as glass. The sound of my mother's sobs filled the room. I expected satisfaction, but what I felt was grief. Grief for the woman who had traded her conscience for comfort, who had wrapped her fear in loyalty until it smothered her judgment. "Claire, please," she said between shallow breaths. "If you love me, don't do this." I looked at her and felt something shift, something final. "If you loved me, you would have stopped him." Laura gathered her papers. "We're done here," she said, gesturing toward the door. My mother hesitated, then turned and walked out without looking back. When the door clicked shut, I exhaled for the first time in what felt like years. Laura's voice softened. "You handled that perfectly." "No," I said quietly, staring at the window. I handled it truthfully. Outside, the day was overcast gray light spilling through the blinds. Somewhere downtown, a man who thought he'd never face consequences was about to hear his name on a warrant. I imagined Tom's face when they read it to him, the confusion, the denial, the dawning realization that his control was over. Laura packed her briefcase. "He'll be served tonight. I'll call you after the arraignment." I nodded. "Thank you." She paused at the door. "You know most people take months before they can face their families. You did it in 3 days." I met her gaze. "I've been facing them my whole life." When she left, the room went quiet again, but it wasn't the heavy kind of silence anymore. It was clean, like air after a storm. I looked at my reflection in the black glass of the window, bruised, stitched, and still standing. For the first time, I didn't see a victim. I saw a witness. And I wasn't afraid of what would come next. 2 days later, I was sitting by the hospital window when Laura's call came through. Her voice carried a calm kind of satisfaction. "They've arrested him," she said. "Forgery, aggravated assault, and coercion. Bail denied." For a moment, I couldn't speak. The words hung there, almost unreal, where I finally asked. "At your house," Laura said. "Police served the warrant at 9 a.m. Your mother was there. She tried to block the door. Didn't work." I closed my eyes. I could almost see it, the flashing red and blue outside the White House on Westbrook Avenue, the officers' voices echoing down the hallway. Tom shouting about misunderstandings, Mom clutching her robe, pleading that it was all a mistake. For years, that house had been the stage for my silence. Now it was the scene of his undoing. Laura continued professional as always. "They found the falsified documents, your forged signature, and multiple empty bottles hidden in the garage." The neighbor, Mrs. Dorsey, gave a statement. She heard the fight, saw your mother cleaning blood from the floor before the ambulance arrived. I didn't realize I was crying until I tasted salt. So it's over, I asked. For him, no. For you. It's just beginning, she said. There's a hearing next week. We'll finalize the restraining order and start the process of removing your name from the loan. I hung up and sat in silence for a long time, listening to the hum of the hospital's ventilation system. The air smelled sterile, but for the first time, it didn't smell like fear. Later that afternoon, Maya came in with a tray. Heard the news, she said, smiling carefully. Word travels fast around here. I managed a weak laugh. Guess I finally made headlines. She squeezed my shoulder gently. You made justice, not headlines. That night, the local news confirmed it. Former contractor arrested for domestic assault and fraud. They even showed the house, the police cars, the yellow tape fluttering in the breeze. My mother's silhouette appeared for a moment at the window before the footage cut away. I muted the TV. I didn't need to hear the reporter's voice. The image was enough. The house that had swallowed my childhood finally exposed to light. The next morning, Laura visited again. He's already trying to claim diminished responsibility, she said, flipping through her tablet. Alcohol, stress, trauma, all the classics. I smirked faintly. And Mom? She's cooperating now, Laura replied. Fear's a good motivator. She's claiming she didn't know about the forged signature. I exhaled. She did. Laura met my eyes. I know, and the prosecutor will too. The hearing was brief but devastating. I sat in the back of the courtroom, my arms still wrapped, my ribs aching beneath my coat. Tom stood in a gray jumpsuit, wrists cuffed, eyes darting between the judge and the prosecutor. Mom sat 2 rows ahead of me, a crumpled tissue clutched in her hand. The evidence was laid out cleanly, photos of my injuries, the medical records, the neighbor's statement, the forged documents. The judge's voice was firm. Mr. Harding, you are hereby charged with aggravated assault, forgery, and coercion. Given the evidence presented, this court denies bail pending trial. Tom turned, then eyes locking with mine. There was no remorse there, only disbelief that I dared to fight back. I held his stare until the officers led him away. When it was over, Mom turned in her seat, her face pale, her eyes wet. Claire, she whispered, please, he's still your father. I looked at her and felt nothing but exhaustion. He never was, I said. Outside the courthouse, the air was sharp with early winter. Reporters waited by the steps asking for comments, but I walked past them without a word. Laura caught up to me at the curb. You did it, she said. No, I replied. We did. She smiled. Get some rest, Claire. You've got your life back. Now you just have to decide what to do with it. That night back in my small apartment, I stood by the window watching the city lights flicker like distant stars. My body still hurt, but inside me there was a new kind of quiet. Not the silence of fear, but of peace earned through fire. Tom was behind bars. Mom's illusion had cracked, and I was still standing. For the first time in years, the reflection looking back at me didn't look broken. It looked free. The morning after the hearing, my phone buzzed nonstop. I thought it was Laura with updates, but it wasn't. It was Facebook notifications, dozens of them. My mother had posted a long message that began with, "Sometimes love gets twisted by lies." The comments poured in, friends from church, neighbors, people who'd known me since childhood, all telling her to stay strong, all calling Tom a good man. She'd turned the story around overnight. Now I was the villain, the ungrateful daughter, poisoning the family name. I stared at the post until my hands started to shake. Every comment was a blade. An hour later, a message arrived from her private number. "You're destroying our lives. Take down the charges. You're better than this." I deleted it without replying. 10 minutes after that, another one came from an unknown number. "You'll regret this." It had to be him or someone speaking for him. Laura had warned me this would happen, but knowing didn't make it hurt less. That afternoon she called. "Don't look at social media," she said immediately. "They're trying to control the narrative. I've already sent cease and desist letters for harassment. I don't care about their words," I said. "It's the fact that they're still trying to rewrite what happened. Like the bruises weren't real." Laura's voice softened. "They're cornered, Claire. Cornered people throw noise. Let the noise stay online. You stay silent." That night, I sat on the couch of my apartment, the room dim except for the lamp's golden glow. The quiet felt fragile, like it could shatter if I breathed too loud. I looked around the small kitchen, the folded hospital papers on the table, the coffee mug Maya had given me. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I wasn't bleeding, I wasn't apologizing, and no one was yelling. The silence finally meant peace. The next morning, local news ran another story. Community shocked as stepfather faces fraud charges. They included my name this time. My inbox filled with messages from strangers, some offering support, others spitting venom. One simply said, "You should be ashamed of airing family business in public." But among the hate were messages that mattered. Women who said, "I lived this too." Nurses who said, "Thank you for speaking." And one from Mrs. Dorsey. I heard the sirens that night and prayed someone would finally believe you. I'm glad they did. When Laura came by that afternoon, she brought official papers. "The restraining order's permanent now," she said, sliding the document across the table. "Tom can't contact you for 10 years. Your name's off the property. Your financial ties are clean." I stared at the page. It felt heavier than it looked, a single sheet that ended a lifetime of chains. Laura watched me sign the final line. "How does it feel?" I exhaled slowly, like breathing after being underwater too long. She nodded. "It's not over emotionally, Claire, but legally it's done." I spent the evening alone cooking for the first time since the attack. Nothing fancy, just pasta and garlic bread, but the smell of butter and salt filled the apartment with something that almost felt like life. When I sat down to eat, my phone buzzed one last time. A message from Mom. "He's gone. They took him away this morning. I hope you're happy." I stared at the words for a long moment, then typed back, "I'm not happy. I'm free." Then I blocked her number. For the first time in years, I slept through the night. No nightmares, no shouting, no apologies forming on my tongue. Just the quiet hum of the city outside and the certainty that I had survived something that was never meant to be survived. When I woke, sunlight filled the room. It touched the bruises fading across my arm, turned them golden for a moment before disappearing. I made coffee, opened the window, and let the air in. For the first time, I didn't think about my mother, or the house, or the years lost trying to be loved right. I just thought about today and how good it felt to exist without permission. The weeks that followed felt like learning how to live in a new language, quiet, slow, and deliberate. I didn't realize how conditioned I'd become to chaos until it was gone. Every sound in my apartment, the hum of the fridge, the tick of the clock, even the soft creak of the floorboards felt like a small miracle. I wasn't flinching anymore. I wasn't waiting for footsteps or raised voices. Maya came by, often after her shifts, still in her scrubs, still smelling faintly of antiseptic and peppermint gum. She'd drop off takeout or groceries sometimes, sit with me in silence while we both pretended to watch TV. "You're healing fast," she said one evening, nodding toward my ribs. "Guess you're good at fixing people, even yourself." I smiled faintly. Occupational hazard. But healing wasn't just about the bruises fading. It was about untangling the guilt that came with them. Some mornings I'd wake with a pit in my stomach, wondering if I'd done the right thing, if sending him to prison had destroyed my mother. Then I'd remember the hospital floor, her hand on his shoulder instead of mine, and the doubt would burn off like fog in sunlight. Therapy helped too. Laura had referred me to a trauma counselor named Evelyn Calm. Voice notebooks filled with quotes and the kind of eyes that saw more than you said. "You've been surviving for a long time," she told me in our first session. "Now you're allowed to live." "Living feels selfish," I admitted. She smiled gently. "That's because you were taught survival was love. We'll change that." So we started small, journaling, breathing exercises, writing letters I'd never send to Tom, to my mother, to the version of myself who believed enduring was noble. Every letter ended the same way: "I forgive you, but I won't forget." One afternoon, Laura called again. "His sentencing's next month," she said. "Would you like to attend?" For a moment, I hesitated. Part of me wanted to stay away, to keep my distance from the rot of it all. But another part, the one that had spent years shrinking, wanted to see justice spoken aloud. "I'll be there," I said. The courtroom felt colder this time, less like a wound and more like a reckoning. Tom stood there, shoulders slumped, no longer the towering storm of a man I remembered. When the judge read his sentence, 6 years no parole, he didn't look at me. He didn't have to. I wasn't there for him anymore. I was there for me. Outside the courthouse, Laura handed me the final paperwork. "You did it," she said. "I didn't think it would feel like this," I admitted. "It's not joy. It's quiet." "That's peace," she said. "It's supposed to be quiet." That evening, I met Maya for dinner at a small cafe near the hospital. She raised her glass. "To surviving," she said. I shook my head softly. "To starting over." We talked for hours about work, about life, about how strange it feels to rebuild after the wreckage. Before we left, she slipped an envelope across the table. "Something for you," she said. Inside was a flyer, Quiet Strength, support group for survivors of domestic abuse. Meeting every Thursday, Community Center, 7 p.m. "I think they could use someone like you," she said. That night, I stood in front of my mirror, looking at the faint scars along my temple. They'd faded, but they would never disappear. And I didn't want them to. They weren't reminders of what he did, they were proof that I survived it. I went to the first meeting a week later. The room smelled like coffee and printer ink, the walls lined with folding chairs. A few women sat in a circle, some young, some older, all carrying invisible weights. When it was my turn to speak, I took a breath and said, "My name's Claire, and I used to think silence was strength, but I learned that sometimes silence is how they keep you trapped." Heads nodded around the circle. I felt seen. By the end of the night, someone suggested creating a network for legal aid and emergency housing. I offered to help. It felt like purpose, not revenge, not closure, but something steady and real. When I got home, the city lights glowed through my window, soft and golden. I made tea, wrapped a blanket around my shoulders, and wrote in my journal, "Peace doesn't come when they stop hurting you. It comes when you stop needing their apology." And for the first time since I could remember, I closed my eyes and believed it. It was almost spring when the letter came. Plain white envelope, no return address, but I recognized the handwriting immediately, neat looping, always slightly tilted to the right. My mother. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. Inside, her words were shaky, written on floral stationery like she was still pretending everything was normal. "Claire, I don't know if you'll ever forgive me. I've been seeing a counselor since the trial. They tell me I have to face what I did, not just what Tom did. I let it happen. I let you be hurt because I was too afraid to lose him. I see that now. I wish I could take it back." There were more lines about regret, about shame, about how empty the house felt without me. She ended with, "If you ever want to talk, I'll be here. I love you." I folded the letter carefully and placed it in a drawer, not out of anger, but because I wasn't ready. Forgiveness wasn't something you owed. It was something you decided in your own time. That weekend, I took the train to the coast. I hadn't been near the ocean in years. The air smelled of salt and cold iron, the wind sharp against my face. I stood by the railing watching the water crash and reform over and over, endless and patient. It reminded me of healing, slow, rhythmic, unstoppable once it starts. I thought about my mother. For years, I'd confused her fear for love, her silence for protection. But standing there, I understood something I hadn't before. She was a victim too, just one who refused to leave the fire. I couldn't save her from that. But I didn't have to burn with her either. When I returned home, the apartment felt smaller but warmer somehow. The Thursday meetings at Quiet Strength had grown. We had 20 regular members now and a volunteer therapist. Some nights I just listened. Other nights I told my story again, not for validation, but as a kind of offering. Every time I spoke it aloud, it lost a little more of its power over me. One evening after everyone had left, Maya stayed behind to help stack chairs. She glanced at me and said, "You ever going to visit her?" "Maybe someday," I said, "when the anger stops feeling like armor." She nodded. "When you do, make sure it's because you want peace, not because you feel guilty." "I know," I said quietly. I finally learned the difference. A month later, I received a call from Laura. Tom's appeal was denied, she said simply. "He'll serve the full sentence. He's already been transferred to state custody." I exhaled slowly. "Thank you for everything, Laura." She paused. "Don't thank me. You did the hard part. You stood up." That night, I sat by the window with a cup of tea, the city glowing beneath me. I thought about everything that had happened, the hospital lights, the courtroom, the tears that never seemed to stop. And then I thought about what came after the laughter at the support group, the quiet mornings without fear, the smell of fresh air through an open window. It wasn't happiness exactly, it was peace. real, ordinary, hard-earned peace. Before bed, I opened my journal and wrote, "Maybe healing isn't about forgetting the pain. Maybe it's about building something stronger in its place." The next morning, I mailed a short letter to my mother. Only 1 page. "I got your letter. I believe you're sorry, but I'm still learning what forgiveness means. I hope you keep healing the way I am. I don't hate you. I just can't go back. Take care of yourself." I sealed the envelope, dropped it into the blue mailbox on the corner, and walked away without looking back. As I reached the end of the block, the sun broke through the clouds, soft gold unassuming. For the first time, I didn't flinch from the light. I just stood there breathing it in, letting it touch the parts of me that had once lived only in shadow. I was no longer surviving the story. I was writing the next one. The first anniversary of the night, everything broke, came quietly. No fanfare, no reminder. Just the gentle hum of rain against my apartment windows. I spent the morning watering my plants, making breakfast, folding laundry, the kind of ordinary things that used to feel impossible. Healing had taught me that peace isn't a grand arrival. It's 1,000 small choices to keep going. That evening, Quiet Strength hosted its largest meeting, yet 50 people filling a community hall that once echoed with emptiness. Some were new, still shaking when they spoke. Others had found steady ground. We shared stories of survival and small victories, a woman who finally changed her locks, a man who'd started therapy after 30 years of silence, a mother who left and brought her kids to safety. Every story was a mirror, and every mirror showed me how far I'd come. When it was my turn, I stood in front of the group and said, "A year ago, I thought justice would fix everything. It didn't, but it gave me the chance to rebuild, and sometimes that's all you need, a chance." I looked around the room at the faces nodding through tears and continued, "They'll tell you to stay quiet, to forgive quickly, to remember family. But love without respect isn't love, it's control, and you have every right to walk away from it." The applause wasn't loud. It was soft, respectful, the kind of sound that carries truth. After the meeting, Maya hugged me. "You've turned your pain into something alive," she said. Laura, standing beside her, smiled. "You didn't just win a case, Claire, you built a legacy." Later that night, I walked home through the rain. The streets glistened under the city lights, puddles reflecting neon and moonlight. I passed a florist's shop still open late and bought a single white rose. When I got home, I placed it in a glass jar by the window. Not for him, not for her. For the version of me who had survived both. I sat down, opened my journal, and began to write. They said silence was strength. They said patience was love. They said forgiveness was peace. But I've learned something truer. Silence is survival. Patience is endurance, and forgiveness, real forgiveness, is letting go of who they wanted you to be. I paused, looked out at the rain, and added one final line, "And I am free." As the clock ticked toward midnight, I opened my laptop and posted a message on Quiet Strength's community page. "To anyone out there who's still bleeding in silence, you don't owe them your loyalty. You owe yourself your life. Speak even if your voice shakes. Leave even if your legs tremble. You will find peace not in their apology, but in your freedom." Within minutes, comments began to appear. "Thank you for saying this. I needed this today. I believe you." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Their words were enough. Before bed, I turned off the lights and stood by the window. The rose glowed faintly in the moonlight, water droplets sliding down the glass like time itself. For the first time, I didn't feel haunted by what had happened. I felt grounded by what came after. The past was still there, a scar that would never fade, but it no longer defined me. It reminded me. The next morning, I woke early, brewed coffee, and watched the sunrise. The sky turned from gray to pale gold, and I smiled because light always finds its way in. If I've learned anything, it's this: healing doesn't make you who you were before. It makes you someone new, someone wiser, softer, stronger. And that strength isn't about surviving violence, it's about choosing peace every single day. Sometimes I still walk by the courthouse just to remind myself that justice isn't a fantasy. It's real. It happened. And it started with one woman saying no more. As I pass, I whisper to the air, "For all the ones still waiting, I see you." Then I keep walking, head-high steps, steady, heart unburdened. Because the story isn't about the night I was hurt. It's about every day I've lived since. and that I realize is the truest form of victory.